Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks for spending your evening with us. We really appreciate it. And then if you have any questions about that amazing announcer, that was Ken Quiethawk, and you can find him at nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife are phenomenal storytellers, and what they offer us is a peek into history and let us know how history was recorded before the textbooks came about, and how it is a way of reminding us of where we've come from and the amazing way of telling stories that and history that has been forgotten, that it maybe should be remembered, because history books are not always as accurate as one would like. Mark has an amazing guest tonight, and I am very excited about it because it's a topic that I have often played with, researched, and it's kind of nice to have someone on the show that we can get it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Not that he's a horse, of course. But Mark is going to help to enlighten us on a topic that has been of interest to me, especially for a very, very long time. So, without further ado, Mark, how are you doing tonight?
I'm exhausted. And every tractor supply and hardware store in the area getting there's like traps and cages. There's bait blocks to keep Jeff away from the show tonight.
Good idea.
Yeah, things got a little screwed up last week, but we should be able to complete the show this week.
Yeah, no talking mongooses tonight.
Yeah, well, and talking moms, but that's another story.
Probably.
How's everything with you?
Going well, going very well.
Okay, good. Okay, so we might as well get started and maximize our time with our guest.
Absolutely.
For tonight's show, we're returning to our outlaw roots. I've been outcast a lot, but I found refuge at Nightlight, as long as I don't do a cooking show. But we still get our weekly NSA file on us. But our guest has been busy with some of the big shows, but he is our guest on the day his book actually becomes available. So you can order it from Inner Traditions after the show. Don't do it during the show. You don't want to miss any of this. But some of our guests have made history, like Merle Fankhauser. He was a pioneer of the surf rock genre. Scott Walter investigates mysteries of places where events happened. But our guest Dan Duke is a descendant of a historical person that we've all heard of. Um, Dan is the great great grandson of Jesse James. We will have a reevaluation of his life over the next couple hours. And Dan just published his book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, fine. Just Barbara and I have really been looking forward to this show for a few months now. So we're just really excited, and this fits in perfectly with several of our shows. We'll be working in. We just had Bill Mann a couple weeks ago, and we are working in his review of your book as well over the evening. But I'm far from an authority on the Wild West. But my original impression of Jesse James came from when I was this kid coming home from school and watching the Brady Bunch, and there was that episode about it was like Bobby or someone was being taught about the bad people, and this old guy actor was discussing his grandfather was gunned down by Jesse James. So was this Brady Bunch episode a misrepresentation of your family member, or an accurate portrayal that he was like an American Caligula, like psychopath? We need to have maybe a better understanding of who Jesse James was.
I remember that episode, and it was. I laugh about it now. I remember when I was a kid, I thought, I was kind of mad when I first heard that. But no, he was misrepresented. He wasn't a psychopath like some people claim. For whatever reason, there are people out there who like to brand historical figures with certain labels, and it's easy to do that with an outlaw. And he was far from a psychopath. I believe if he had, and he wasn't a bloodthirsty killer. Those type of people don't usually get by with things as long as he did. He was very intelligent. He lived a low key life, low profile. He had a close knit group of friends and family, and he didn't go outside. I mean, in those days, especially when you're one of the most wanted men in the country, you have to live that way if you want to live.
Mm-hmm. So, maybe I need to just stick with watching the X-Files then for a better understanding of history. But let's take a look at in your book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure. Now you do give us a biography of Jesse. How did he grow up? Where did he grow up? What's the time period?
Okay, he grew up during this, when at the start of the Civil War. He was just entering his teenage years, but the fighting had begun in Missouri and Kansas long before, about a decade before the Civil War actually started. A lot of people say that the Civil War started in, that was the beginnings of it, of the fighting on the Missouri-Kansas border. And, it was back then it was the frontier. Kansas guerrillas would raid into Missouri, and then Missouri guerrillas would, ride back and raid them. It was just back and forth for years, and the fighting just grew more intense and more brutal. Where at the beginning of the Civil War, Frank, who was Jesse's older brother, Frank James, he joined the legitimate Confederate Army. Jesse was too young. He stayed at home. He was plowing his fields one day, and a group of Union-backed guerrillas, rode onto the farm, strapped Jesse to a plow, and brutally beat him. And after they were done beating Jesse, they rode onto the farmhouse, pushed his pregnant mother around, whipped her, and hung his stepfather from a tree. But it didn't kill the stepfather, but it did cause brain damage. So you can see why, especially a 14-year-old boy, he just got brutally beaten by people who attacked him unprovoked. So, he wanted revenge. He couldn't join the legitimate Confederate Army, but he found a group who would let him ride, and that was Quantrell's guerrillas. And during the war, Quantrell's guerrillas were very good at killing. In battles, they would kill huge numbers of their enemy, and maybe one of them would get wounded or killed. They were just, and people were scared to death of them. They had a brutal reputation. They were good at what they did, and Jesse was one of the best at, one of the deadliest guerrillas. So that gives you an idea of how deadly he was. That was during the war. Well, after the war ended, the U.S. government granted amnesty to Confederate soldiers, but it didn't apply to Quantrell's guerrillas. So they were outlawed. Jesse tried to turn himself in, and he got shot through the chest. It was through his right lung. It was a bullet right through his right lung. Somehow he survived, and that was the second time he'd been shot through the right lung. But he survived a second time, and he couldn't turn himself in. If you did, you would be executed. So they were outlawed, and I believe that's the main reason they started their outlaw career. They had no other choice. They were being hunted. If they were found or surrendered, they were executed. So they might as well live up to their name.
Okay, and it does seem like there might be some post-traumatic stress disorder involved in what he was doing as well. Just witnessing, his family being, brutally beaten, as well as what he suffered. It is more understandable than just born. He wasn't born bad. I'm just trying to make that distinction.
Well,
He probably would have had a different life if he didn't have that witness those kinds of horrific events.
exactly. He came from a good family. They were well educated. Frank was well known for quoting Shakespeare. He loved Shakespeare. He loved quoting Shakespeare. His father was a Baptist minister, and he was also one of the founders of William Jewell College. So, they came from an educated, good family background. And if it hadn't been for the war, he may have been a doctor or an attorney or something like that, or a farmer. But, just a normal person.
So, Dan, after after he was not granted the amnesty, can you just give us a little idea of what his career was as an outlaw? Like, what were the guerrillas?
Well, during the war, that was basically a good training for his career as an outlaw. They learned, guerrilla tactics, which are very hard to fight against. After the Civil War, when he began his outlaw career, they they struck trains, banks, and stages, mostly. And they always did it. It reminds me of a special forces group. They had their plan. They had a target. They knew, they didn't go away empty-handed. So they had inside knowledge, knowing there was, and I don't know the details on that. I've always wondered how they knew which train would have the gold shipment or things like that. It was, they knew what they were doing, and it reminds me of a special forces group. They had good intel. They didn't let anything stand in their way, and they got the job done, except for Northfield, Minnesota. But I don't believe Jesse was in Northfield. I think that was Wood Height, his cousin. And I don't know if you know about Northfield, Minnesota. That was that was supposedly, it's been chalked up as the fall of the James Gang. They rode into Northfield, Minnesota to rob a bank, and the people in the town were waiting on them, and they got shot to pieces. I mean, they got shot up. They all got out of town, but the younger brothers were captured. They were wounded bad. One of them was shot through the mouth. They spent a good part of their lives in prison, and the legend says that Jesse and Frank got away. They did get away, but Jesse wasn't at Northfield, Minnesota. I believe that was his cousin Wood Height, who bore a strong resemblance to Jesse.
Okay. So that may correct some of the misconceptions. So listeners at some point may need to correct. But speaking of that, you had a lot of putting your book together. You had information coming from other people, like the old timers, who may have known him. He actually lived. We'll get into here shortly, but he actually lived to be very old. So there are people who you spoke to, or your mom spoke to when she was compiling her book, where they actually knew Jesse.
Yes.
And so what are some things that you heard from those people contributing information to your family's research? You also have other samples of maybe a little embellished stories versus what was handed down, to like the family legends. What are some of the comparisons and contrasts that you learned?
Well, when he was, a lot of the old timers had a lot of good stories. When he came to Texas, he had a pack horse with him, and his saddlebags were full of gold coins. Back in those days, Reconstruction America, after the Civil War, it was very hard for some, especially a Southerner, to have much money at all. The South was broke, and he comes riding into Texas with a saddlebag full of coins. He didn't show it off, but that was one of the stories carried down through the family. He met his future father-in-law. They had already known one another somehow, and I don't know how right now, but his father-in-law was Captain Thomas Hudson Barron. He was a former Texas Ranger. He married Thomas Barron's daughter, Mary Ellen, but when he rode into Texas, he met Barron. A few weeks later, they made it to Barron's ranch, and he purchased 160 acres from Barron, and he paid for it with gold coins. There's a lot of other stories involving the gold, and he's buried a lot of it. I'm trying to think and brainstorming of all the old stories I've heard. George Roming, for example, I knew George. He was a good man. He was a friend. He passed away in El Paso about 10 years ago, but he helped when he was 10 years old. Jesse was in his 90s, and Jesse had hired him. He was in his early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Jesse swore George to an oath and hired him to help him move 680 bars of gold. And they moved it about 30 miles from Jesse's home in Blevins, Texas, met some other old men and buried it. That gold's now located on the Fort Hood military reservation. So I'd say that's pretty inaccessible. But
right.
So, yeah, there's that. George said when he would walk, this was back in the old days. George was 10. It was in the 1930s. George would walk from his home past Jesse's home, and he said Jesse would sit up on the porch with drinking lemonade and would call him up to the porch to sit with him, and they'd talk, and they would just talk. He didn't go into a lot of details about what they spoke about, which I would love to have known just what kind of conversations they had. But he said Jesse told him, he pointed at a rock the size of a golf ball, and he told George to walk 40 paces out across the yard and set the rock down. And when George got back from setting the rock down, he said Jesse drew his pistol as he was stepping off the porch and shot the rock the size of a golf ball. And this is a man in his 80s, at the time, shooting just perfectly. They said he was an extremely good marksman and very quick. George said when he saw that, it was a big gun, a big man with a great big mustache and a big hat, and it just scared him to death. So he said he from that day on, he didn't think of, he was a little afraid of him, somebody who could shoot that good.
And you do present some other information in your book about the James Farm and Museum people who kind of had some disputes with your versions of history versus what they've been putting on display for a long time at their museum. What's the story there?
Yeah, well, the traditional story of Jesse James is that in 1882, Bob and Charlie Ford, who had infiltrated the gang, had shot him in the back of the head, killed him for a reward, and that was the end of Jesse. Well, there's a lot of holes in their story, and when you grow up, our family has always had the story of Jesse faked his death, changed his name, lived to be an old man here in Texas, and died at the age of 97. Well, the traditional story, after 20 years of research, now 30, but my mother had proven the traditional story to be completely false. It's full of holes, and all it takes is a little digging and looking into things like an investigator would, and you can find the discrepancies in the holes pretty easy. She pointed it out in 3 books she had written. Our family photographs match known historically accepted photographs of Jesse. And we didn't just go to some guy who claimed to be an expert. My mother took the photos to the Texas Department of Public Safety, who is our version of the state police. They verified it. Their forensics lab verified that our photos match the historically accepted photos. She took them to the Austin Police Department forensic photographic specialist. He verified that our photos match, and she took it to a third one. At the time, it was a company named Visionics, and they were purchased later by a company named Identix, but they were world leaders in facial recognition technology, and they too verified that our family photos matched the historically accepted photos of Jesse, his mother, and other family members, like Reuben Samuel, his stepfather. So, we started with that. That was the first big aha moment. When you've got the photos matching, plus the family legends, we had his diary, which mentions known gang members, Bud Singleton and others. Also in his diary, he would vaguely, he would list the trips they were going on, that he would go on. Like he went with his friends to Louisiana, to Shreveport, hopped a steamboat, the Emily LaBarge, I believe was Amelia LaBarge or Emily LaBarge. But anyway, that was the name of the steamship. They hopped that, went down to Natchitoches, got off the steamboat, and then rode back north along a road. And they stayed at a few people's places who have been also verified as being having associations with the James Gang. During those trips, if you look at the historical, news reports of robberies, the steamship had been robbed at the same time he was there. A stagecoach was robbed at the same time he was there on the road. All these robberies happened, and he mentioned known gang members. So, that fits. And then there's a lot of other evidence that just falls into place like that. But the big one was, they had an exhumation of Jesse James's alleged grave in 1995, and up in Missouri, in Kearney, Missouri. And they claimed that they proved with DNA that Jesse James was shot and killed in 1882. Well, Mom started looking into that, and my sister Teresa and I helped her with a lot of the research. We found that the exhumation was false. When they dug in the grave, first of all, they didn't need to open the grave like they did and completely excavate it. All that's needed is to bore down into a grave and retrieve a dime-sized sample of bone. But they made a show out of it. They dug up the entire grave. The guy they had heading the exhumation wasn't even a doctor. He was a law professor. So then when they dug up the grave, they found male and female bones and female clothes. And that didn't make sense. That's all mixed up, a lot of different bones in one grave. So they went from that to they didn't retrieve any DNA from the grave. Then they subpoenaed the James Farman Museum and got a court order to use a sample of Jesse's hair and what was supposed to be one of Jesse's teeth. And they were going to test those for DNA. Well, the attorney, he's now an attorney, his name's Stephen Caruso. At the time, he was the county commissioner for Clay County. He told my mother and I in person that the hair that was submitted, he was in control of the hair. He had it in his possession. And the tooth in a Tupperware bowl they had, he pulled a hair out of his friend's head. He didn't agree with the way they were doing the whole exhumation. He said it was a tawdry sideshow. It was wrong the way they were doing it. He didn't like it, so he wasn't going to submit the real hair. He pulled the hair out of his friend's head, who was John Hartman, the Clay County Parks director at the time. And he used John Hartman's hair and submitted that. They tested it and showed that it had dye on it and acted like this is proof that Jesse dyed his hair. Well, then the tooth they tested that they say they got the DNA from, it was exhumed from the yard of the James farm in 1978 from the original grave that Jesse was supposed to have been buried in. Well, in 1978, they dug up where the grave was. They found a human tooth, a dog's tooth, a hog's tooth, and some other animal bones. And they kept the human tooth in a Tupperware bowl. All these people had touched it. It had gone from person to person. And then they submitted that for DNA testing and claimed, we proved this is Jesse. Well, it's a tooth from the yard. It could have been anybody's tooth. There's no proof as to whose tooth that was. There's a lot of holes in the story. So basically what they pretended and played off as proof, we have DNA proof, is no proof at all. They proved nothing. And when the truth about that is told, they basically embarrassed themselves. So, that was a huge moment. And then since then, we've had other findings, family photos. One of the more recent findings is a photo showing my great-great-grandfather, Jesse James, a.k.a. James Lafayette Courtney, standing next to his mother at his own funeral. And that was an amazing photo to find. He attended his own funeral. And the reason he could get by with that, nobody could ID him except his immediate family and his closest friends. Nobody really knew what he looked like. The man in the grave is his first cousin, Wood Height, who bore a strong resemblance to Jesse.
Right, okay. Yeah, the story keeps getting curiouser and curiouser.
Yes, it is. It's been an amazing adventure, to say the least.
But Dan, what you're saying about you get the like nearly the FBI facial recognition testing with a lot of today's high tech gadgets. That'll give you some a lot more proof than a bunch of bone like 2 or 3 people buried in like a mass grave, and you just take one bone from it and do a DNA testing of that. I know you have to document. I know I've had to do that in one of my articles where it's not really a valid test if the museum is aware that there are like 3 or 4 right thigh bones in a Tupperware container where someone from a mound was located.
Yeah,
I mean it's not really a valid test.
Exactly, and it wasn't just one group of forensics. The forensic groups who examined our photographs and verified that ours matched the historically known ones. That it was 3 separate groups of highly credentialed professionals. Some of the people they used in the past were, and I'm not mocking the people, they did their best, but they went to guys who were artists, oil painters. And I'm not saying that, I'm not mocking them, but at the same time, that's far from highly credentialed. When you're playing with history, you want to make sure that everything you have is verified by the most qualified people you can find. And, an oil painter versus people who are highly credentialed forensics professionals, there's no comparison, in my opinion.
Right. So, Dan, so, you established, your family's connection to Jesse James, and as you start getting into your book, you start talking, a little bit about the Knights of the Golden Circle, and that might be a topic that is going to be developed in some upcoming shows. But you would think that the Reconstruction period, the Knights of the Golden Circle would fit in with Jesse's biography at that time, like the 1870s, 1880s. Can you tell us a little bit about Knights of the Golden Circle? But you do veer away from turning this into a Knights of the Golden Circle story. So let's get an understanding of what the group, the Knights of the Golden Circle, were about.
Okay. Well, the Knights of the Golden Circle were a kind of a covert group. They were a secret society. They operated covertly during the Civil War, and basically during the war, their job was to cause trouble in any way they could to slow down the movements of Union troops. It said that most of Quantrell's guerrillas were Knights of the Golden Circle and other guerrilla groups throughout the South. They were spies. They were saboteurs. They did all sorts of activities, basically, to just cause trouble for the Union troops. They were at war, so that's not surprising at all. Both groups are going to have groups who, both sides would have groups who did things like that. They were very good at what they did, and they caused a lot of trouble. Jesse it's been claimed that he, a lot of people say he definitely was, and they lump in guys like Albert Pike and others, and it wouldn't shock me if during the war they may have been part of that group. And at first, for a while, I believed the treasure was Knights of the Golden Circle treasure. Their goal after the war was said to have, they wanted to gain enough wealth and money, and they buried it in caches across America, Canada, and also Mexico. And that was the legend about, the KGC. They wanted to gain as much wealth as they could, bury it and hide it and save it until they had enough to fund a second Civil War. And it was supposed to be, the caches were said to have been strategically located all over the place. So if they needed it, they'd always be near one, and they could retrieve it and cash it in to buy whatever they needed, supplies or whatever. So I thought, that kind of makes sense, and it wouldn't shock me if they were part of that group. I've never seen any proof that they were, but it's a secret society, so it's easy to lump all these people in, and who's going to argue? Nobody knows. Or if someone does, they're keeping quiet about it. So while, as you can imagine, any outlaw like Jesse, they've got treasure legends. A lot of them have treasure legends surrounding them. And we had a map that had been passed down through the family. I'd seen several other maps. And then, like I'd mentioned earlier, George Roming had the story of burying 680 bars of gold with Jesse. And he drew out a map and showed us where it was supposed to be. So I used that. I started trying to find the treasures. I thought at most I may find a jar of gold or a saddlebag full of coins. And, I thought it'd be great to have something that belonged to my great-great-grandfather, like something like that. I mean, it'd be a great historical value. Right. So, and I wanted to find it. Who wouldn't want to find treasure? So I started researching, looking for it. And around that time, former Attorney General of the state of Texas, the late Wagner Carr, he had been talking to my mother for years about Jesse. He originally believed that J. Frank Dalton was Jesse, but after getting to know my mom and they talked for a while, he believed our story. Mom showed him, where she debunked the J. Frank Dalton stories. After talking, he had his driver show my mother and me where several treasures had been located but were recovered, and these were very large treasures. So using the template, there's a treasure template called the KGC template, or Knights of the Golden Circle treasure template. You can find that online in a lot of places, and I found it. Somebody had shown me. It'd been in several books and other places. I personally think J. Frank Dalton got that from my great-grandmother, Ida. After Jesse had died, his daughter, Ida, my great-grandmother, was living in Marble Falls, Texas, and J. Frank Dalton had stayed right across the street from her house in the Roper Hotel for several months. And he would talk to her. When he left town, she had been missing some papers. Some of her father's papers, Jesse's stuff. And I don't know if he took it or if he purchased it from one of Ida's children. I don't know how he got his hands on it. That's a mystery. But I believe that's where he got the treasure template that was later published as a KGC template. So, trying to make a long story short, I used the template. I didn't have a scale for it until I was shown, the map that George Roming drew for us and the treasures that Wagner Carr had his driver show us. The treasure where they used to be. So I used those locations, and that's how I discovered the scale of the template. And over time, it just grew into more discoveries, more treasures. The template, when you line it up next to each other, and they end up covering, it turns into a grid system that covers Canada, America, and Mexico, the Americas. And it just got huge. I started noticing a lot of the locations on the template, which now by that time I refer to as the Veil template. They lined up with other, not only known treasure sites where treasures had been recovered, not just in Texas, but other states, but they also line up with historical monuments and sites of historical importance, like the Los Lunas Decalogue Stone in New Mexico, the Kensington Rune Stone, which Scott Wolter had done a lot of work on, the Newport Tower, and even areas surrounding Oak Island. So I thought, okay, it lines up with these ancient sites. Perhaps the KGC had used some of these areas for, like the historic sites as markers. So maybe that's why it belonged, maybe that's why those were located on the template. It was real puzzling. But then I found out about Victoria Peak, New Mexico. And this was a treasure site. Supposedly, a man by the name of Doc Noss had discovered it. It was mentioned in the Watergate hearings. So there was something of great importance in a mountain out in the middle of the desert in New Mexico for it to end up in the Watergate hearings. And so I got to researching that. It turned out a lot of the treasures found in Victoria Peak were much older by centuries than the KGC. So that started ruling out the KGC as having been involved in this. And then it also tied in with the Bruton Parish Vault in Williamsburg, Virginia. And that predates the KGC by several centuries. So, things started making me question the KGC's involvement. I came to find out, or to believe, that the KGC, if they played any role in this at all, it was a very small role and very limited. And they probably didn't have, if they did play a role, it wasn't an important role at all, or wasn't very important. I think they had treasures, but I think their treasures may have been recovered by other people and taken away from them. But just for conversation's sake, if the KGC's goal was to refund a second Civil War, there was more gold supposedly found in Victoria Peak than Spain had taken from the New World in all the years they were taking gold and shipping it back to Spain. So if they were going to fund a new Civil War, a second Civil War, there was more than enough in Victoria Peak to do that. So that's another thing that just kind of debunked the KGC involvement in the story in my mind.
Okay, so you just ruled out what one source of that would have influenced the placement of Jesse's treasures. So you have to look for another group that may have had an influence on Jesse to make one of these templates. Okay, exactly. So can you tell us about your shift away from the Knights of the Golden Circle to another?
Yeah.
Group?
Well, when Jesse came to Texas, he was living under the alias of James Lafayette Courtney. He became a Freemason. Some people in the family claim he was a Freemason before he came to Texas. There's no proof of that. I just know that when he came to Texas, he became a Freemason, and he had used so there was a tie with some of the symbols he'd written, things I'd researched, seemed to bear a strong resemblance to Freemasonic symbols, but that doesn't at first I wasn't sure. For a long time I kept researching, reading. While I would research that, trying to find out who put this there, who designed the template, why did they put it there? All these questions constantly, and it took a long time. It wasn't just overnight. This took years of research, but eventually I tied it in. The Freemason, Jesse was a Freemason. Albert Pike, we all know, was a Freemason, very famous Freemason. I started reading Pike's works and also other Freemasons like Manly Palmer Hall, Timothy Hogan, a lot of different. I was reading everything I could get my hands on, just looking for clues or any kind of tie, and everything started to fall into line. Pike mentions a lot about Kabbalah. He has a diagram of the Tree of Life, so I started researching that more. Well, I found out there's actually two templates. There's the first template, which I used to refer to as the KGC template, and then there was a Tree of Life template that runs from the Bruton Parish Vault in Williamsburg, Virginia, all the way to Victoria Peak, New Mexico. It's 1,715 miles, the distance between the 2 points. Well, the number 1715 kept popping up in other areas too. For example, that's the distance from Bruton Parish to in miles. Well, from Bruton Parish to the Wren building at William and Mary College, it's 1,715 feet. The Grand Lodge of England was the Freemasonic Grand Lodge of England was formed in 1715. There's just a lot of numbers that kept popping up in a lot of different ways. So I looked into that. Reading Pike got me into reading Kabbalistic texts and looking for, learning about gematria and as much as I could about the Kabbalah, different forms, Jewish Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, occult Kabbalah. And all these things started adding up, different numbers, not just 1715, but other numbers. And the funny thing is, to me, it was amazing to me. It wasn't funny. I was just stunned. When I did 1715 can be broken down into 5 times 7 times 7 times 7. Well, I found, to make a long story short, I knew about the template in the Tree of Life design, but the 1715, which makes up the center pillar of that Tree of Life template, it can be translated Kabbalistically into meaning, behold the Tree of Life. And then there were other numbers, like from Victoria Peak to another treasure that was 12 miles from my home, it's 548 miles. That can be broken down into 4 times 137. The number 4 in Hebrew or in Kabbalah can be translated as door, and 137 is the gematria for the word Kabbalah. So it's like behold the Tree of Life and door to Kabbalah. It just seemed all there, and there's so much more I've mentioned in my book where these numbers just keep adding up, and there's basically it's like a signature and telling you all about it in the form of numbers and geometric designs.
That's fascinating.
And I thought, okay, this is too much to discount. I started tracing back. I thought, okay, if I'm right, then there should be a clear trail, kind of like a family tree or an organizational chart, much like a mind map. There should be a clear-cut trail from Jesse through Freemasonry, from Freemasonry to whoever began this, if Freemasonry was involved. And I believe from all my research, it ties from Jesse to Freemasonry, Albert Pike, back to the founding fathers of the United States, beyond them to men like I mentioned, the William and Mary College in Williamsburg. The man who designed that building was Sir Christopher Wren. He was also a Freemason and a member of the Royal Society in England. It ties back from Sir Christopher Wren, Sir Isaac Newton, men like Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon wrote a book called The New Atlantis, and The New Atlantis was basically a blueprint for what America was to be. They want, all these persecuted groups, Jewish people, alchemists, Freemasons, the Templar, anybody who had any belief or did something that went against the established dogma or the Catholic Church at the time, they could lose their head for speaking, for just speaking their mind if it went against their belief. So I believe their goal was to create a new Atlantis, America, a place where there was liberty and freedom, different cultures, beliefs could get along in harmony and live a peaceful life with freedom and liberty. And I thought at the time, when I traced it back to Francis Bacon, I thought, okay, that's the guy who started it all. And I was satisfied for a while, but then as I kept reading and researching, it turned out he was a big, important part of this, an extremely important part, but he wasn't the guy who started it. It tied back all the way to the Templar. And I traced the same way I did from Jesse to Francis Bacon through associations like a family tree. It goes back through John Dee, who was the original 007, Francis Bacon's mentor. People like Leonardo da Vinci, John Hieropoulos, Johann Rupelin, back to the hidden map that I found, who on the book titled Porte Lucis, which was a translation of Abraham Gicatilla's work by a man named Paolo Riccio, who is also known as Paulus Riccius. He wrote the book in 1516, and it was also another interesting piece of trivia from that was that the same publisher who published that book was the same publisher who had published several of the Grail stories. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and there's an illustration in Porte Lucis in the back of the book of a knight holding up what appears to be a grail over his head, or a chalice. And it was just a lot of interesting little things like that. But the hidden map was undeniable. The man sitting on a chair holding a tree of life and pointing towards the coastline of the United States at the time, the New World, it fell in line perfectly with the Tree of Life template that I discovered. It all just kept falling into place. And it ties back past him through Emperor Maximilian I, who was known to be a friend of Freemasonic guilds. Back then, there were operative Freemasons, the cathedral builders, who had passed down knowledge, sacred knowledge and secret knowledge throughout, the generations. But it went further through different Jewish rabbis back to a famous rabbi by the name of Rashi, who happened to be the favored court guest of Hugh, the Count of Champagne, who was one of the founders of the Knights Templar. And now I need to catch my breath.
Okay. And, Dan, and, the numerous illustrations that you have from various texts, you gave us a couple samples, but one that was really intriguing. It was the front piece of Porte Lucis with the shadow on the sitting guy's shoes, and the floor in front of him, and he's sitting on like
a chair,
like a portable lawn chair, like a early 16th century portable lawn chair.
It's some sort of folding chair, I guess.
Yeah. You see him at the take those little kind of chairs to the ball field to see the kids play baseball this summer. It's basically the same thing. That and you're looking at it. You're detecting something in the shadow that probably most everyone is going to miss. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, the chair he's sitting on ties in with Scott Wolter's hooked X. I mean, if you look at the chair and the dagger he's wearing, it makes a hooked X sign.
yeah, it does. Yeah.
On his shawl, he's got a crisscross pattern, or on over his shoulders. I don't know if it's a shawl, but on his clothing across his shoulders, there's a crisscross pattern, which is representative of the veil, which ties back into the veil template. He's pointing at the floor, the shadow you mentioned, and I thought, okay, why is he pointing at the floor? And when I noticed the chair being in the shape of Scott Wolter's hooked X, I thought, okay, if there's other symbols other than the Tree of Life, which is an obvious symbol right out front. But I looked down at the floor, and I thought that looks like the U.S. coast in a way, and part of the shadow looks like waves, like a depiction of water. So I got curious. I thought, okay, this book was written in 1516. I found a world map that had been printed around the same time, in the same around that time period. I overlaid it over the cover of Portalucis, and it lined up perfectly with the coastline of the New World. North America down through Central America and the top portion of South America. And I thought I think that's what he's pointing at. The man sitting in a chair appears to be dressed for travel. He looks like a traveler, which has a lot of other meanings associated with the traveler. I mean, you could even tie a traveler back into guys like, mythology, like Mercury or Hermes, but anyway, he's in alchemical meanings, but he's pointing, looks like he's dressed for travel. He's pointing at his feet, which are pointing towards the New World, and he's holding the Tree of Life in his hand. Behind him on the wall are hash marks, and I thought, I don't know if those mean anything or not, but it was interesting that there were hash marks. And I noticed just while I was taking a break one day, after reading all I've read on Kabbalah, there was a new video out. I saw it on YouTube. It was by a lady by the name of Victoria Hanna, and she sang she lives in Israel, I believe. She was singing in Hebrew the alphabet song. They called it the Aleph-Bet song. And I noticed there was a lot of symbols in the video. At the end of the video, the children were drawing the same hash marks on a chalkboard. And I thought there's got to be something to that. So I investigated, the prayer that they were singing. And it turns out the hash marks represent rain, which is another symbol for blessings. So to me, it looks like he's sitting, this man, which is probably a representation, in my opinion, of Abraham Gikatilla, who wrote the original work. He's dressed for travel. He's holding a Tree of Life. He's pointing to the New World, and the hash marks on the wall behind him, it's like blessings. It's like, head to the New World. That's where you'll find your blessings. That's how I took it. And it went deeper. I mean, the Tree of Life matches the Tree of Life template, and he was part of this. This is just part of the story when I was tracing it back to see how far back it went and where it originated. And this guy was this was a very important clue in the story.
Okay, and Dan, aside from the Porte Lucius, looks like a woodcut. You're also using another famous artwork that is also uses pointings, and
yes,
it seems to be guiding people to a destination, and it's the shepherds of Arcadia, and it also fits into the the Shugberry Hall.
Yes.
So you actually have like the same artwork in the painting and reproduced at the like castle site in England. So, can we talk a little bit about this other artwork and the importance that you found in locating these treasures?
Yeah, the Shepherds of Arcadia, also known as Et in Arcadia Ego, by Nicholas Poussin. That was painted in 1637 or 38. The first time I saw this was in the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and that I had read the book, and then I revisited it when I was researching this, and I got to looking. I noticed that what the shadow of the man in the painting, who's on his knees kneeling and pointing at the tomb, he's pointing at the letter R, which a lot of people have theorized. There's a lot of theories about what all this means, but I noticed the shadow and the way Nicholas Poussin was a master painter, so you would imagine he uses shadows. He would know. He would keep in mind the angle of light, and the angle of light was really off on this. And not only that, the shadow resembled. At first, I thought maybe a heart symbol. A heart is the shape of the heart is a known treasure symbol. A lot of treasure hunters are always looking for heart-shaped stones and other things that are in the shape of a heart. But I got to looking at it closer, and it actually looks like a harp or a lyre, the musical instrument. Mm-hmm. And it puzzled me for a while. I also the letter R, when I started piecing that together, there's a style of harp known as R-shaped. Well, it's like an R-shaped harp, or R harps is what they call them. But anyway, the harp is representative of, and my big clue on this came about when I was reading an essay by a Rosicrucian by the name of Peter Dawkins. And I'd seen a few videos from him. I read some of his essays, and he wrote an essay about Oak Island. Well, he had mentioned the constellation Cygnus, which is the swan, and that had a lot to do with the Star Deneb, and it had a lot to do with the Oak Island mystery, the treasures that are said to be buried at Oak Island. And I thought, okay, maybe something in this painting ties in with that. And I found out the harp represents the constellation Lyra, which is at the time in Cassini's celestial globe of 1792, when a lot of this was happening around that time period. The harp represents Lyra. It was placed at that time, located over the heartland of the United States. And I thought, okay, if this is true, then there's got to be other clues. And I finally identified that the people in the painting are also representative of constellations. Like the man kneeling represents Hercules. Hercules knelt before the eagle. See, the constellation Lyra in the classical mythology and in the astrological maps was portrayed as an eagle by some people. Some cultures said it was a buzzard, but it was also portrayed as an eagle, and it had the harp of Orpheus placed in the stars with it to honor the mythological character by the name of Orpheus. It ties in with a lot of the Greek and Roman mythology as well. But Hercules knelt before the eagle. The eagle was also representative of Zeus, and it ties in with the constellations perfectly, and with Lyra in the center. I believe that's a pointer, basically showing that the treasures were moved to the New World. Poussin was known to hide a lot of secret knowledge and secrets and codes in his paintings, and I believe that's one of them. I believe that represents Lyra and the part of the treasure that is located in the heartland of the United States. And I believe it also ties in with the Tree of Life template very well. And I believe it ties in with the 7 cities of gold, the old legends of Cibola and the Lost Seven Cities of Gold.
Yeah, and Dan, with in your book, you have reproduction of Poussin's painting, and on the next page, 81, you show where many of these treasure sites are located. And of course, there's Oak Island out by Cordell's house, and Newport Tower, and I think later this fall we're going to be doing a more in-depth study of that structure. But what was at the Bruton church? Went to Williamsburg, I don't know, 25 years ago or so, and yes, saw the Wren building. I just walked around the exterior of the Bruton Parish church. But it just seems to be like one of those churches where a lot of the founding fathers are stopping in, and something's going on. And it's like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington are attending service at the same time. What is the significance of that church? You're talking about the tunnels and vaults under the church. Is that I didn't see that on my tour in the area. Didn't hear anything about it. It was something documented being stored there that may have been brought across the ocean. Some treasure.
Yeah. I believe when I was researching, trying to find out who did this and why, I came across the writings of Maria Bauer, later Maria Bauer Hall. She married Manly Palmer Hall, who was a famous, he's a 33rd degree Freemason, author and lecturer. He'd written a lot of books. One of my favorites was the Secret Teachings of All Ages. In Maria's book, Foundations Unearthed, she had been researching Francis Bacon and the Bruton Parish Church. She had said that she'd found codes in different places while researching Francis Bacon and Shakespeare, and tombstones in the Bruton Parish Cemetery. She'd found hidden codes that led to the original foundations of the original Bruton Parish Church. People laughed at her, or if they didn't laugh, they just didn't believe her. And she proved them wrong. She used the codes she found and located and proved that it did. She found the codes led to the original foundation, which is another number. The church that stands now was also built in 1715, which is how that number, which I'd mentioned earlier, also ties in. But she also said that the codes also indicated a vault buried under the in the cemetery beneath the ground, hidden vault that contained some sort of treasure that could be of great historic and significant spiritual value. Something that would be earth-shaking, just like a history-changing information, documents and different items. And I would love to know what was in there. I don't know if it's been recovered. She tried to excavate it and then was stopped, and I don't know of any further excavations that have ever been done there. I don't know. I wish I knew what was in there. I don't know if it's still there or if that's been recovered. I would imagine it's been recovered. If there were tunnels leading to it, someone could have easily moved it or recovered it from one of the tunnels. She also claimed that there were tunnels leading from that vault to different locations around the church.
Okay, and just to back up for a second, the Shepherds of Arcadia painting, we've had Bill Mann as a guest a couple times, and he was with Barbara 2 or 3 weeks ago, but he's like one of the highest ranking Masons in Canada. We just really enjoyed having him as a guest, and he covers this painting as well with some different interpretations than what you present. But Bill also had a really good review of your book too, since he'd be one of the leading authorities that you would want to have. His perspective on your book, since you're kind of going. You're weaving, just like family biography and incorporating so much new material that dovetailed you into the Masonic information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was happy when I saw the when I first read the endorsement from Timothy Hogan, who's the Templar Grand Master, and also William Mann. It was I can't tell you how proud I felt to have those two endorsements. That was amazing. I thought, okay, I'm done. It can't get better than this. I'm just gonna leave. So that was amazing to me. But yeah, what you mentioned, different interpretations in the paintings. One thing I would say about that, Albert Pike had mentioned in Morals and Dogma how symbols have oftentimes multiple meanings, and there could be several stories. You could have the same symbols telling several stories. It could mean, there's a lot that you could basically have enough stories in just a few symbols in a painting to enough stories to write a book or more than one book. So, if he had a different interpretation, I'd like, those different interpretations aren't necessarily wrong because they're different. It's just another side of the story.
Oh, right. That's Barbara and I talk about that a lot too. It's just different doesn't mean anyone's superior. It's just different.
Yeah.
It's just another perspective that someone else may have missed.
And to me, that's what makes symbols so beautiful, in my opinion, is all the multiple meanings that they can carry with them. It almost seems more advanced than writing. If you know what the symbols mean, if you knew all the meanings, that's a lot of knowledge that you could convey in just a simple painting.
Yeah, and the example we were talking about a few minutes ago with the shadow in front of the seated figure, you have to know what to look for, but it's there in the message or the paintings. There is a message that the artist worked very hard to put it in there to say something. It's just most of us aren't trained to know what to look for.
That's true.
And you do. with these templates, you do talk about, one of the things it took you a while to understand was the positioning of the turkey tracks and stars.
Yeah, the turkey track was a very frustrating symbol for me. And then after I got deep into this and everything started connecting. That fell in place eventually. And that I remember when I first discovered the meanings behind what's called the turkey track, which is actually not a turkey track, but it was that was a very happy moment for me when I found the meanings behind that and what it actually meant. And the interesting thing, it's a representation of the tree of life, and the ancient, and it from what I've researched, that representation of the tree of life originated in Egypt. It may go back further, but it can definitely be traced back to the Egyptians. So, when I found that, it really was satisfying. That's the best word I can come up with right now. It was just very satisfying to find the answers behind that. The turkey track representing the tree of life just fell in with all the other research that I had already discovered, like the tree of life template and so many other aspects of the numbers, the distances, the dimensions of the template. The veil template ties in with the tree of life template in that a lot of the dimensions and the symbols also represent the tree of life. So they all complemented each other very well.
Dan, as we've spoken a little bit about the Victorio site in New Mexico and Williamsburg, Virginia, and up to Oak Island. You do extend your international investigation of how all these places seem to present a little bit of just a little bit here and there to the story. You also have like Roslyn Chapel. That's some really interesting material there. The Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's going. Back to the foundations of Christianity, and the overlap of Islam. You have so many layers of spirituality or philosophies in throw the Kabbalah in there as well, and they all play a role in the Middle Eastern history, but they do show up here in America. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of these international, like the just say with the Dome of the Rock and overlaying the templates over the foundations of that mosque?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest clues I had when I was trying to trace it back to its origins, like the Templar, came from interviews and writings done by Timothy Hogan, the Templar Grand Master, who I'd mentioned earlier, and he had stated that the Templar. You see, a lot of people like to lump the Templar in with the Crusaders, who raided the Holy Lands and did their thing. Well, he had illustrated how the Templar didn't. They had secret information from men like Rabbi Rashi and others who had Well, they entered the Holy Land long before the Crusades began. Are you there? You there? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
Okay, thanks. I heard a bump or something. Anyway, Timothy Hogan had illustrated how the Knights Templar had gone much earlier than the Crusades began. They entered the Holy Lands. They met with different peoples of different faiths, like Sufi mystics, the people of the Druze tradition, Jewish elders, rabbis, and Kabbalists, and all these different faiths. They knew what was coming. They knew the Crusades were coming. They knew what would happen during a war of that scale. Things would get destroyed. Sacred and historic texts could be destroyed easily. So they wanted to safeguard all that, treasures, all this stuff that could have been taken and ruined or misspent. They went in with the goal of preserving all of this, and that's exactly what they did. That's where the treasures originated from. A lot of them, the Holy Lands, from different religions and different texts, and they were there to protect it and preserve it, not just for themselves, but for the good of mankind. And that's basically the point of this entire story. Is they did this for not themselves. It wasn't for their own gain. It was for the good of mankind. And as time, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I find it very fascinating that certainly throughout all time there's always been intrigue and interest, and there's been a magic sort of attached to stories of treasure. But I'm finding that of late, within the last decade or so, there has been more of a search and an awakening about different treasures, and it's almost as though a lot of them have been waiting to come into the fore, to come into the consciousness of all of humanity. I mean, this seems to be a time when, especially the antiquities, the stuff from the 1200s, 1100s, the first century, those treasures are coming into everybody's frame of reference, and it's not uncommon for people to be talking about all of these treasures. And I'm wondering if it's almost as though there's a grand plan of some sort that when society, humanity is ready for these treasures, that they are going to come into the awareness and possibly even been found. Have you postured on any of that at all?
I have the same thoughts. When people are ready, things seem to come out. It may even tie in with my research. If it wasn't ready to be known, I wouldn't have found it. That's how I view it. It was just meant to be. Not just my research, but research from other people like William Mann, Timothy Hogan, and a lot of other authors. Things come out when they're meant to come out. I don't know whose plan it is, but I do believe there's a plan.
Don't you think it's been quite fascinating that all of these hints and these messages and these codes have been hidden from all of us for centuries, and suddenly people are picking up on them, and it's like, oh, whoa, that's a signal for this, and this means that, and you kind of go, you want to go back and talk to Poussin and kind of say, all right, so not now, but hundreds of years from now, we want to have people discover this treasure. How are we going to, trigger something in their memories and let them know there is a treasure there?
That would be great. I know during the research, when all this started falling together, you get a strange feeling of some kind of, it's like a connection with people from the past, reading Albert Pike. And I would never even think of claiming that I could be close to the level Albert Pike was, mentally. That guy, he was a genius. And other people like him, like you mentioned Poussin, it's almost like you've got a slight connection with them in some way. I'm discovering things that they knew, and it's almost like I'm seeing in a odd way through their eyes at times. if that
Well,
makes
yeah,
any sense.
you mentioned one of my favorite books. That's Manly P. Hall's book. I mean, these people, are well over 100 years or more in our past, and yet they knew enough to say humanity isn't ready now, but someday they will be, and here are the clues. And when they get to the point where their consciousness is raised up enough so that they see the clues, then it will give them, it's a trail of breadcrumbs that leads to something. And, sometimes a treasure isn't gold and stuff like that. Sometimes it's knowledge. And,
Exactly.
and you're on such an amazing trip and things fall into place. So I think it's really cool. I can't see where you go to next.
I've often thought, and you stated that perfectly. I've often thought that a lot of I believe the Veil template has a lot of the like traditional treasure, gold, silver, items like that, and they range from small, like a jar maybe, to a large catch. But I've often wondered if that's not more of a decoy in a way. Yeah, I think it also carries a spiritual or some type of significance to it. But I think the treasures that are located in the Tree of Life template are of a much more significant value, like knowledge and things of spiritual nature, items of historical importance and spiritual importance.
Yeah,
Barbara.
Oh, well, let me just finish, and then I'll give you your show back. I really kind of think that while the gold is tantalizing, the people who are just after the gold aren't of a level of consciousness to understand what other treasures are there, and so they won't find that physical treasure because they aren't searching for the right treasure.
I agree completely. It's more of a, and I don't want to knock anybody, but it's more of a primitive nature. And like you said, it's a lower level. And if they're not ready, they're not going to find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often wondered about that.
I got carried away.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you jumped in. That was, you said that perfectly.
And Barbara, some of the talks we've had with Jason Gerald, he's talked about the basically the Tree of Life from the Native American mythology as well. So it's the same concept is being used by all these different cultures at different periods. It's just like almost like a built into the human psyche idea of connecting upper and lower worlds, this world.
Exactly, like the Veil template that I mentioned.
Yeah.
It plays a huge role in this, but it's also I studied Jewish Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, and a little occult Kabbalah in finding answers behind the answers I needed. And that was amazing. But I have noticed not only the Tree of Life, but like the Veil template, that design, the crisscross design, it's used in alchemy. It's also used in other beliefs and cultures. You can go back to ancient primitive, what they considered primitive or what were labeled primitive. I think there were a lot of those groups that were labeled primitive were actually more advanced sometimes, but they had a lot of them used the same symbols. Indra's net, for example, the god Indra was said to have had a net that it resembles the Veil template. It closely resembles it, and the center of each net, or the center of each rhombus design on the net was covered with jewels, and every jewel on it reflected all the other jewels. So there's a lot with that. Different cultures, different beliefs that also tie in with this.
And Dan, since writing this book, you went down all these different rabbit holes, different types of Kabbalahs, and looking at like Islamic holy places, laying a little template over the structure that mosque. When you look back on your writing of this book, Jesse James and Lost Templar Treasure, you have a biography of your great-great-grandfather. What did you learn from this experience by putting all this stuff into a book that has family stuff, international intrigue, and artwork? How did you grow from this experience?
Oh, that's a good question, and I'm still wonder. I ask myself that a lot. I know it's definitely, it took years. It took 20 years of research and slowly piecing. Sometimes it would, clues would take forever to find, answers to, and then other times it would flood in, and then it would slow down and it'd take a while, more digging, and but over the years, it has opened my mind a great deal towards a lot of different things, little things that used to bother me or upset me, with, like, if you turn on the evening news, there's a million things that can upset people. They don't bother me anymore. It's forced me to look at a lot of things in the world on a much larger scale, in terms of history, historical scale, and just knowing, I'll say I drive downtown Austin, Texas. I'll notice designs in the architecture on buildings, and I think, there's a tie. Whoever did that may have been a Freemason, the architect, and a lot of architects back in the day were Freemasons and still are, but it just the meanings and stories behind just certain designs. It's little things and large things. It's changed me in many ways. And that's hopefully that made sense, but it's a very eye-opening experience. When I first started, for example, I thought, good, I want to find my great-great-grandfather's treasure, and that would be great. And then it turned into, I stumbled across probably one of the largest treasure mysteries in Western history, if not the world, and the mindset that came along with all the research, it's too important for me. It's not mine. I don't want it. I would love to know the knowledge and what's behind, I would love to know what's in each spot. That would be like a dream come true for me. But at the same time, it's not for me. It's for a bigger reason, a bigger plan, and it's not for one person. I believe it's for the world, and I think the Templar and the Freemasons are the guardians, or the caretakers of it. They're the ones who they originally acquired the treasures to preserve them, and that's what their job is. I think that's what their whole goal is. And over time, as people are ready, more will be known. Hopefully, it'll happen in my lifetime.
Okay. Well, Dan, you do say, okay, when we look at the paintings, okay, there's knowledge in the artworks that you discussed. That's part of the treasure. There's also some points you made in the book about when you lay these templates over certain areas, you use the 15 number, and do some of the calculations there. Where some of the treasure may be buried is on public lands.
Yeah.
Probably most of it, if it's it wasn't dug up by someone who knew where it was a long time ago, and it's gone. But there might be some that still remain. Uh, Seems like a lot of that is on private property. We just aren't going to have access to it. If you tell people why you're there, they aren't going to give you access. That's why we're working on on a Tuesday night. But do you have like some kind of gut feeling that hey, there might be a few gold coins still in a few mason jars in someone's backyard who has absolutely no idea that it's even there?
Yeah, I do. I think there's probably quite a few out there, especially the smaller ones. I think there may be, I don't know, maybe several hundred at least. But as for the large ones, a lot of the large ones have been recovered. I believe a lot of them have been recovered. I know of several that were recovered. There may be more out there, large ones. I think there are, but I think some of those would be more protected. These days it would be easy. You just buy up the property around it or that it's located on and just keep people from, entering the property. It'd be an easy way to protect it. That's a good question. I have a feeling there's a lot out there that's still there, but I do think a lot of it's protected.
That doesn't surprise me. It's just with this template that you've spoken about throughout the evening. It just seems like someone knows where everything is. It's just not the time to get it.
I think so. I think that's exactly right. It was laid out. I always compare it to if you laid out a plan for a city, you would create a grid system and then build your city based on that grid system so you'd know where everything was. And the Veil template is basically the same thing, or it's very similar to that. That way, because a lot of people go by like this old treasure map. Well, if the treasure map is even 100 years old, in some cases even less, you could bury a treasure, come back 50 years later, and the topography could look completely different. Floods, wind, erosion, all of that can completely change everything about the topography. So
building of a neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. Developments, all sorts of things. So a lot of, the grid system, which I call the Veil template, makes perfect sense. That way, it doesn't matter how it changes. You know exactly where it's at, going by the coordinates and in the older days, the stars, their mapping systems. They would know exactly where it was.
How your mom's trilogy similar to this, or is that more of a just straight biography?
My mother's work was proving that Jesse James didn't die as history had stated. And she went a little into the treasures, but she didn't get into the treasures. I mean, she wanted to find a treasure too, but she was more concerned with proving Jesse James faked his death and died here in Texas at the age of 97. I went more into the treasure side. I would help Mom research, and then I would when I wasn't doing that, I was always researching the treasures and everything connected to it. But that said, my sister Teresa and I have co-authored a book that's continuing our mother's work, which should come out, I believe, in 2020. I don't have a definite release date yet, but it will be in my publisher's September catalog.
Okay, and
that
can you use a little preview?
Yeah, well, it's basically a continuation of our mother's work. It involves forensics, more forensic evidence. The photograph that I mentioned earlier of Jesse attending his own funeral, which I always laugh when I say that because it sounds insane, but it's actually true. He is there standing next to his mother at his own funeral. And it sounds insane on the surface, but when you know the stories, especially my mother's books, and we went over that in this new one just to keep everybody fresh on, the story. Nobody knew what he looked like. He had a very small tight circle of honest, trusted friends, people that he knew he could trust, and those were the few who knew what he looked like. So on the surface, it might sound crazy that he attended his own funeral, but nobody else could identify him. I mean, the law couldn't identify him the entire time they were after him. So it's an amazing story.
It is.
And we also have DNA evidence that we'll present in that book as well, and where we're at in how we've progressed and where we're at right now.
Yeah. What do you think? Have you seen the movie Return of Frank James?
I've seen a lot of them. I'm pretty sure I've seen that one. I've seen most movies with Jesse James mentioned in them, and listened to most of the songs with his name. But
yeah. There's it's a Fritz Lang movie.
It doesn't come to mind right now, the details of it. But.
I was just wondering if with such a well-respected director, and not long after he came to America, he makes this Western movie. I just wondered if you had seen it and you wanted to provide a
what
comment.
Year was that made?
About 1939.
Okay, that was
1940s.
One of the older black and white ones. I've probably seen it. I've seen a lot of them. We used to rent every Jesse James movie we could get our hands on, when I was a kid, and we'd watch those. And even now, when I see one on TV or know of one or watch it online, it's just, I have fun watching them. A lot of them they're very entertaining. Some people get mad at Hollywood for throwing a story off. It's about entertainment. And if people are entertained, they will look into the history. And not in all cases, but a lot of cases, they'll look into the history behind it. And that's what gets, I don't have a problem with Hollywood, taking liberties with stories. It's always, as long as it's entertaining, I'm happy. My favorite Jesse James movie is called The Long Riders, had the Carradine brothers in it. And that one that's my favorite Jesse James movie. It didn't go, it went by the accepted history. It didn't go by what I view as the truth, but at the same time, it was very entertaining.
What did you think of the Joe Walsh and later the Tommy Bolin bands name themselves after your family?
I always liked that. Just anything I can find on Jesse, songs, movies, it's always I view it as a lot of fun. That's how my whole family, it's just fun. They're entertainers, and if it's entertaining, I have a good time. I don't have a problem with with it at all. So.
Yeah, and
But
I
I
want.
go
ahead.
There's a few movies I didn't like. One of the most recent movies about Jesse. It just I didn't find it entertaining. I don't even know if I should mention that. So I don't want to make any enemies. But anyway, there's a few that I didn't like. That if they're not entertaining, if I don't find it entertaining, I'm like, yeah, just change the channel and go watch The Long Riders.
Okay. Well, one of the subjects, we really haven't touched on a whole bunch. And, we have like 13, 14 minutes left. Is the importance of stars. You mentioned it a few minutes ago, but a few times in your book, you have work in Venus and Vega, other celestial bodies like the moon. You really do take a comprehensive look at all these different philosophies that go into understanding these templates.
Yeah, it gets very complicated and deep. When I just writing the book, I had so much. My desk was covered constantly with papers and notes and all the different cultures. I mean, there was influences from Egypt, ancient Egypt, alchemists, Jewish traditions, Druze and Sufi, Islamic traditions, all these different beliefs, Celtic and Druid items. I mean, there were things that, like dealing with the moon and numbers that tied in with the moon and the cycles of the moon. There's so many different cultures that have had influence in this. It's almost like a global treasure. That's how I view it. It's a world treasure. It happens to be in the Americas, but I believe it belongs to the world, and the Templar are the custodians of it.
Okay. So, do you own the house in Blevins, or do you know where the property is? Like,
we where Jesse lived, he had a house, and then he rebuilt his home. I can't remember the date he rebuilt it, but the house that was there, we offered to purchase it. There was an old farmer who owned the land, and he was all for it, but one of his sons didn't like anything to do with it, anything to do with us purchasing the house, and he just it's a long story, but we offered to purchase the house and 1 acre for $100,000, which was way over the market value. I mean, it was they would have got a great deal, and we would have got what we wanted. Our goal was to preserve the home. And a few years after we had made the offer, he just tore the house down. After the old man, his father had passed away, the guy who owns it now just tore the house down. And I believe he was looking for treasure. There were treasures buried on that property, and I think they had found some. In fact, one of his relatives had told my mother about some treasures they had found, and I'd done a little research into that and found that it appears that they probably did find some back in the 60s. But that, to make a long story short, yes, I know where the property is, and I wish he wouldn't have torn the house down. We wanted to purchase it from him, but he I guess thought there was treasure inside it, so he tore it to pieces, which is a shame. Just to have the house that Jesse lived in would have been a nice family heirloom, to pass down. So our goals were to make it into a museum, but that won't happen.
Wait, do you have? We have about 10 minutes left. Yeah, do you have enough family heirlooms that you could open some kind of museum, or have a display in your county museum?
Yeah, we've got quite a few heirlooms. I don't know if we opened our own museum, it would be a small one, but there's enough for a small museum.
Well, the Mothman Museum's not all that big.
I haven't been to that one. Right now, as of now, that's our ultimate goal, is to have it in a museum. That way, it could be protected. No one could, it would be protected, so it wouldn't be damaged or destroyed or hidden away from historians or anybody who wanted to anyone who had any interest in it could come and view it, and it wouldn't be hidden away. So I had one relative who, she was an elderly lady, and I don't judge her just because, different generations have different values and beliefs. She was ashamed that he was Jesse James, just because, some people in history portrayed him as an outlaw and a criminal, and she didn't want anything to do with that. She burned over 200 of his letters.
Wow.
And, that's, to me, in my opinion, that should be viewed almost as criminal. That's burning history. But she burned over 200 of his letters because she was ashamed of it and wanted to hide the family secret. So that was a little that's the kind of thing that'll get you a little mad. But I can't judge her for it. It was different belief, different culture, and she did what she thought was right, although I think it was completely wrong. There's really nothing I can do with it, so it doesn't even help to get mad about it.
Do you have any conference appearances coming up, anything of that sort? Or
right now, no. I'm working on setting up a book signing soon, but I've been so busy lately, and then last week I had the pneumonia, so it kind of set me back a little bit. But now I'm better, I'm well, and I've got more shows, interviews coming up, but no lectures that I know of yet. Or book. I'm working on a book signing, but I don't have a definite date right now.
Okay. You're doing well with the interviews. I mean, you were on Midnight in the Desert recently, and Richard's show.
Yeah.
Last week, or he at least posted it last week.
Yeah,
so
I was on.
You are getting the word out, and Inner Traditions does a really nice job of.
They do
helping people to get connected to hosts.
They are a very good publisher. I didn't expect half of what they do a lot of work, and they're very friendly and easy to work with, and they have made this entire process a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So and working with different groups. Like I have fun on all the interviews. I've had a lot of fun on this interview. Lost Origins, Ancient Origins, Midnight in the Desert, Richard Surrett. I believe I pronounced his last name correctly. I've got others lined up, the Supernatural Girls, Paranormal, and others. But I've got a lot of interviews, and I need to set up a book signing. I just haven't had the time lately.
Sounds like it'd be a really good idea. That's really helps to get people interested in your book. Is actually getting to shake your hand and doing a meet and greet type thing. Just being able to look you in the eye and ask you questions. And that's I hope you can do that. It's very effective way of really connecting with your audience.
That's true. And I had been to a couple of book signings with my mother when she had several of her books, but and that's why the one I'm working on setting up is the same one that she had her first book signing in, and that's the one I want my first book signing in at Barnes and Noble. So hopefully that'll work. And there's a lot of other book signings I need to set up. I need to get to work on that right away. Just setting up book signings in different areas.
Okay, and we're down to just a few more minutes. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to?
One of the main points, you see on if you research Freemasonry or the Templar online, especially online, you find a lot of negative websites concerning Freemasonry and the Templar. Not, there's a lot of good sites, but there's also some negative ones. And I just wanted to point out, I don't understand the negative viewpoints on Freemasonry. I don't agree with them. I've read through some of them. The Freemasons, I believe, are, if it weren't for the Freemasons and the Templar and the alchemists and other groups who are tied in with these treasures, and so much more, we wouldn't have an America today. I think they're the reason we have America and our freedoms and liberties. And they've played, and I think all Americans owe them a huge debt of gratitude. They were amazing people. They still are. They're good people, and they've done a lot for the world. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Okay.
And a lot of the negative things you see, like you'll see people mention Albert Pike in a negative light. I think those were taken. A lot of the people who do that, either they're not at the right level to understand what he's talking about, or they may have some other goal. I don't know, but they take a lot of their words out of context and then spin that as their platform. And I think that's a shame people do that. Everybody's free to have to their own opinion, but I believe, in my opinion, the Freemasons and Templars are my heroes. I think they were a great organization, and we wouldn't be here without them, or at least the country wouldn't be.
Okay. Well, some of our guests, like Rob Sullivan and Scott Walter, Bill Mann, would agree with you. People can go to innertraditions.com and order the book, and after we wrap up in a minute or so. But next week Tim Schwartz is going to be returning to talk about Admiral Byrd on Monday, and we'll be covering some Twilight Zone and the Shadow Radio Show with Martin Grams. The rest of the month has a lot of real special guests. So, Dan, I just want to thank you for being a terrific guest tonight. And, Barbara, do you have any concluding remarks, and we can wrap up for the evening?